So if these links are tied so tightly together, do we see a lot of connection between, like, did the Milwaukee Mafia and the Kansas City Mafia work hand in hand on a lot of things? Or is there really no evidence of that? It just seems to be like they just were marrying each other.
Primarily just marrying each other. And that's kind of the weird thing about this is in the Mafia world, like, marriages are largely arranged. Like, so this isn't like a coincidence.
Okay.
These marriages were probably, at least half of them are probably decided. It wasn't like they were all coincidentally like, oh, I'm going to marry another member of the family. So this was kind of set up that way. And the reason for that is similar to the way, like, the royal family used to do things. It's like, hey, if I have children and you have children and we're both mafia guys, if our kids are married to each other, that will bring us closer together, right? Mm-hmm. Because in the mafia, it's very important to have those strong blood and marriage links. If for no other reason, then you're less likely to turn somebody in if you're, if they're family. So there's that, yeah. But there isn't a strong amount of, like, where there is some. I mean, going forward, Kansas City will pop up again and again, but it's like always really dumb things. Like if Frank needs a new car, he'll go to Kansas City and he'll get a car from somebody there. There aren't, like, major crimes where they're working together. It isn't as strong as you would think based on how much there's this overlap. And
there is nothing like where I'm going to screw this up, but a Balistreri from Kansas City moved up to Milwaukee and started the Balistreri family. It was more like maybe two brothers came from Italy, one settled in Milwaukee and one settled in Kansas City. Right?
Basically, yeah.
So there's not really a connection between the family. Like, obviously they're related.
Yeah.
But it's not like they would have known each other because one would have spent their entire life in Milwaukee. The others would have spent their entire life in Kansas.
Right. I think that they knew that they were, like, distantly related. And there is, like, because, okay. We've talked about this, like, before. Like, a lot of the way it works is when people immigrate from Sicily to America, like, entire villages come to the same city. Mm-hmm. In the Milwaukee's case, the primary one we talk about is Santa Flavia. And Santa Flavia largely picked up and went to Milwaukee. So there is that overlap here, where even though this other branch went to Kansas City, they definitely have family members who've settled in Milwaukee, because Milwaukee was, like, the main place. Mm-hmm. The majority of people in Kansas City, of Sicilian Americans in Kansas City, did not come from Santa Flavia. So why this branch did, I don't know. They definitely would have friends and family in Milwaukee. So it's not, like, completely random. Mm-hmm. I don't think that they were necessarily, like, buddies. Mm-hmm. They could have been.
There has to be some sort of link, though. Because
but these aren't cousins. These are, like, fourth or fifth cousins.
Yeah, and there has to be some sort of strong link, because it would make so much. Even when you say that most of these are arranged marriages, mm-hmm. Now that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah,
it also, to me, makes more sense that they would arrange marriages with people from Chicago instead of people from Kansas City, because while to us Kansas City isn't very far away, I'm pretty sure that even in, like, the 60s, Kansas City was considered a much further distance than it is today to people, because flying wasn't as prevalent and things like that. It just wasn't easy to get there. So it seems weird that they chose to go the path of Kansas City rather than Chicago. Unless Chicago's like, yeah, we're not going to arrange any marriages with you guys or something.
Yeah. I mean, my guess on that is just that Chicago doesn't have, or at least didn't have, the classic textbook mafia outlook.
That's true.
Because there aren't a lot of family links in Chicago. I shouldn't say there aren't a lot. There are. It's not like super extended. It's common for there to be brothers or sons-in-laws or whatever, but not to the extent where everybody's related to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And Chicago's more multi-ethnic. Like you can be Polish and they don't care. And they even had a Japanese guy run gambling for a while. Like the being Italian isn't as important to Chicago. Right.
And I guess now that I hadn't thought of that, but now that you say that, that makes a lot of sense. Like they kind of looked at it like, well, and maybe to the little other mafias, Chicago wasn't really looked at as even a mafia because they were so much different than all the other mafias because of those reasons.
Right. And they typically aren't referred to as that way. I mean, the actual name that everybody calls Chicago is the Chicago outfit. That's what they're called. You very rarely hear people say the Chicago Mafia. You could say that and you wouldn't be wrong, but it's not like what most people say.
And when you say most people, I think most average people like me would say mafia. Well, but anybody that's knowledgeable in the mafia calls it an outfit.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the newspaper would call it the Chicago outfit.
Oh, do they? Okay.
Yeah. I'm not aware of the newspaper ever saying the Chicago Mafia. Like,
really?
I'm sure it's happened for whatever reason. Like, outfit is the name that stuck with them. And that probably goes all the way back to Capone. I mean, I'm guessing.
Right.
Because he's kind of the guy who did this, where being Italian wasn't important anymore. And the family wasn't as strong of a thing to him. I mean, his brothers were a little bit involved in Prohibition, but not really deep into crime. He had a son. His son wasn't involved in anything. He didn't seem to apparently see it as like a family business type thing. So I don't know. But yeah, so Kansas City, yeah, and even like, so there's even one more case here where a Balistrieri in Kansas City marries a cousin of our Frank Balistrieri. I mean, I guess that's the reason I got all these papers here is because this is like my little family tree thing I printed out. But that's just basically the point I wanted to make is like, just this one family of like, whatever it is, 8 kids, like 6 of the 8 kids are like married into direct relatives of Frank Balistrieri. Like, this is not coincidence. There is some really strong links. So when he needed guys to come over from Kansas City to kind of like be like, okay, I'm shaking things up. I'm bringing in some new guys. We're going to straighten it out. And primarily what he did at first was he got the bookies in line. He wanted the bookies to know that he wasn't going to screw around anymore. So he probably had to call up the boss, but whatever. He got Buster to come over, and Buster brought his brother-in-law with him, and they came over for a few years. And they weren't there very long. It was like 61 through 63. That's as long as they stayed. But it was long enough where they really shook things up and was like, yeah, a new guy's in charge here.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And I guess now that when you add that he brought people in from Kansas City, now this story even makes more sense because obviously maybe they weren't doing a lot of things together, but they were obviously very tight knit because if he's going to call down there and ask them to send people up and they're willing to send people up, obviously they have quite a close relationship. Yeah. Because again, it goes back to the same thing where it makes a lot more sense to call Chicago and have them send people up but obviously he chose Kansas City because he was much closer to that regime or whatever term you want to call it.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I assume people listening to this know the very basic geography. Like, Milwaukee to Chicago is not that far.
Yeah, not far at all.
But he doesn't call in a Chicago guy to get stuff done. Like, they might call in a Chicago guy for a murder or something, like just come in for the day and do something. That might happen. But for something like this involved, he goes all the way to Kansas City, which is a bit of a hike. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is that. And they were always close families. There's always, anytime somebody gets married, even when it's not an arranged marriage, just regular marriage. I mean, big groups in Milwaukee are going to Kansas City, and Kansas City's coming to Milwaukee. Like, there's just that strong of an overlap between the two, where they're always at these functions.
And
or
you,
funerals or, anything like that.